So when I do a SIPOC, I like to start with the customer and understand who they are and what they value. And from there, you can look at the outputs of your process. I actually usually do the process last because I like to get an understanding of the inputs and suppliers. So once I've defined the I and the O, now that process is very defined in kind of its start and kind of its end. I know what it's producing at the end and I know where it's starting, and I can have a better understanding of my process.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Lean Solutions Podcast. My name is Shane and I am joined here by the lovely Catherine. How are you today, Catherine?
I am very well, Shane. I'm very well. Yes, all going good. How are you?
Excellent. I am well as well, which I think I say every time. You can see I am wearing how I'm feeling right now. Summertime. I got my, I don't even know. I picked this up at a Goodwill. I don't even know what this is. It's something. It feels like summer, which also brings me to today. We have a great guest coming in who's been on many other podcasts before. I'm excited about what he's going to share with us. And to whet the appetite, I would just want to talk about really the topic of what we're talking about here is not this, but it's simple tools. And I have right here a simple tool. Now, if you're unaware of what this simple tool is, it's a kettlebell. For those of you that can't see on the audio version of this podcast, look up kettlebell real quick. And I love this tool simply because it gets me ready for just about anything. Now, it's summertime, so obviously I'm hoping to make it to a pool or two. I'll probably keep a shirt on, but if I don't, I'd love to at least, look the part of someone who doesn't have a shirt on and looks okay at the pool. But there are all kinds of different things that we have, simple tools. And I'm sure, Catherine, you have lots of them that you have around the house that, or in your life in general, that you use that sometimes we don't even think about just because we just grab it, we use it. Today, we're going to talk about a simple tool that sounds really awkward because it's an acronym, but I don't want to give it away just yet. But I'd love, Catherine, for you to introduce our guest. Who do we have coming on today?
Yes. So to talk about SIPOC today, we have Michael Parent. And let me tell you a little bit about Michael. So, hi, Michael. Michael is a leader and a coach with expertise in leading change and mentoring executives towards operational excellence. He specializes in operational excellence through quantitative methods using Lean Six Sigma, quality, simulation, and plenty of others. He also has plenty of qualifications, way too many to name, but he is a certified Lean Six Sigma black belt. He has an MBA and a whole list of other, you can look them up. We'll give you the links at the end. Michael's work includes strategy formulation, operational planning, and execution, and continuous improvement. And what's interesting is his diverse industry background allows him to quickly identify operational gaps, align stakeholders, and implement sustainable solutions that deliver measurable business impact, which is what we all want. Michael, how's it going?
It's going very well. Thanks for having me.
Good. Well, this is a great topic that we have today. It's kind of like it's a very specific one, and as Shane said, it's on a specific tool that I think a lot of people don't know a lot about. So I am really interested to get your take on this. So let us first of all explain to people listening what it is we're talking about. So for anybody who hasn't heard of SIPOC before, tell us a little bit, Michael. Just what is it? What does it stand for as well? And just break down what it means, what tool is it we're talking about today?
Yeah, so SIPOC is, I would put it in the domain of process mapping. So if you think of a high-level process map or a value stream map, this is like a cousin to that or a relative of that. And what SIPOC stands for is it stands for suppliers, inputs, process, outputs, customers. And it is a way to understand a process at a very, very high level. And why I like this tool so much is, for me, this is a very logical starting point in doing process improvement. As you're working through an A3, going through the background, going through a current state understanding, the SIPOC really helps you from the get-go scope out what it is you're talking about in terms of the process, but also in terms of the stakeholders, and kind of getting at least a high level understanding of what you're looking at and why you're looking at it, and what's being transformed in this process that we're talking about.
Right. Michael, can you give me some specifics of how a SIPOC scopes things? I mean, for some of our listeners, they're not lean practitioners, and maybe this word kind of doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. But how does a SIPOC give scope, and what benefit does it have? Because you also mentioned understanding who the key stakeholders are. I mean, all of that sounds great, but it's an acronym. So tell me where all those come in.
Yeah, great question. So the SIPOC is very, very helpful because it gives you a specific terminus to what you're interested in investigating. What can go wrong if you think of process improvement projects is you can have scope creep, where we start talking about one process and then slowly that morphs into this thing that's kind of related, kind of not related, but let's go ahead and include it. And maybe that's a different customer, maybe that's a different process, but it feels kindred to what we're talking about. So it just naturally creeps upon itself. The SIPOC really protects against that sort of failure mode because it allows us to define very specifically what the outputs are that we're driving towards and delivering value to the customer. So it is a visual process mapping tool, which is, as we're kind of talking ambiguously about what the SIPOC is.
Right,
it is this this kind of high level tool that fits into like 5 categories: suppliers, inputs, process, outputs, customers. And essentially what people do is they go through each of these categories and they write out what this is. Who are my suppliers? What are the inputs that I'm transforming in this process? What is the process itself? Is it a sequence of steps? What's the output? What does the customer get at the end of this process? And then lastly, the customer itself. Who are these people? What are they receiving?
Does that mean you start with the process then? Because you have to know what you're talking about before you start a SIPOC. So do you start with suppliers, then go input, then we'll process, or do you actually say, okay, this is the process that we want to break down and get a high level view of. Let's now look at our suppliers input process.
How I like to do it is, if we go back to what lean is all about defining value and optimizing value and removing waste. We know that value is seen in the eyes of the customer. It's defined by the customer themselves. So when I do a SIPOC, I always try to start with who the customer is and then work backwards.
Interesting.
So maybe it could be a COPIS. I don't know. Anyway, I like to start with the customer and understand who they are and what they value. And from there, you can look at the outputs of your process and say, okay, how does this relate to what they value? Maybe we don't even need to do a process improvement process. We just really need to focus on this relationship between what we're delivering to our customer and what they expect and what they need. Sure. And so on and so forth. I actually usually do the process last because I like to get an understanding of the inputs. Yeah, I like to get an understanding of the outputs.
Okay.
I like to get an understanding of the inputs and suppliers.
Sure.
And then the way I see the process is it is a step of transformation. I'm taking inputs, I'm transforming them into the outputs. So once I've defined the I and the O, now that process is very defined in kind of its start and kind of its end. I know what it's producing at the end and I know where it's starting, and I can have a better understanding of my process by doing that. Does that make me a heretic? That's unorthodox?
I can't say, because I don't know how other people. I know that there's variations though. So Catherine, you mentioned something different though. When you asked Michael, like, he starts with keeping the customer forward facing and in the front. And I love that concept, but I think I'm going to let me hear how you do it, because I think I may practice it the way you do. So how do you do it?
Was, do you know what? It's the way I was taught, and I suppose I should be questioning and challenging that a little bit more, shouldn't I? But the way we were taught was, let's say, and I think this is because I work internally in companies. It's the way I've always done it. So a company sees the problem internally first. So I would have been taught to link that problem to a process. So, for example, I'm working in, let's say, a hairdresser's, right? And the hairdressers have a problem whereby there's wastage of product, right? Or the costs are too high, or whatever products they're using, and they want to reduce that down, but they honestly don't know how, or haven't thought about how. So one of the first things we do is, well, we look at, well, what process are we talking about here? So we're trying to figure out, okay, well, really we're talking about the process of, mixing the color, doing the hair and cleaning up, and then as you're doing the hair, how much more color you use. Well, we haven't mapped out the process yet. We've just decided what the issue is and what process it's linked to, and then we start with the S and the I, and then we put the steps of the process down, and then we go I and C.
Oh man.
Yeah,
I do it differently even yet.
Yeah, okay, tell us, what way do you do it?
So yes, I love all of these because the end result is really what's important. Like,
Yeah.
in understanding the customer, understanding what the process is, all of that. And I love how, Catherine, for you, how you mentioned there's a process to this. What is that process? So I will start, and how I was trained was starting with the P in the middle. So you have the SIPOC right across the top. Starting with the P, that's where we started with the process, because that's going to give me the scope to what you were talking about, Michael.
Yeah.
So what are the steps? What are the high level steps? The first, not the first, but 1 to 5, steps of that. And I have my teams write that out so that we understand this is the scope. Is there anything else? Because if we can always add more, but try to keep it high level, and then we go outward. Then we go, okay, from this process, what's the output? Who's the customer of that? Who's the supplier? What is the input they give to the process?
Yeah.
Now, I think we use it that way because where I learned it was at the state of Nebraska, when I was working for the state, and that made most sense to the people we were working with. And so I will tell anyone, in just about any tool you have, make sure the tool that you're using makes sense to the people that have to use it.
Yeah.
What's going to make most sense to them. And so that's how I do it. So I start with a P. Michael, you start with a C, and Catherine, you
P as well. It's the P as well. Yeah. Yeah. But okay, so Michael, you've heard what Shane and I, it's likely you get, still value out of it, just doing it different ways. And at the same time, we're all using it as a sort of a visual tool to get an understanding of what we need to do differently, right? So tell us a little bit, because another question I have is, regardless of the way you do it, when do you introduce it? Because I've seen it introduced at the very beginning, I've seen it introduced in the middle, and sometimes I think we jump into doing it because, we should do this, a SIPOC. It's going to look good, it's going to make everything clear, but then the SIPOC is thrown aside and we're into a process mapping exercise and it just isn't used. So tell us a little bit about, at what point do you use it?
Yeah, I'm afraid to say anything now. You guys are going to tell me I'm doing it wrong.
Not at all.
For
Not
me,
at all.
I certainly like to use it as early as possible. It's one of my initial tools that I get into. If we follow the A3 format, which for those who are unfamiliar, it's background, current conditions, goals and targets. You jump into the analysis phase, move that to the implement phase, and then follow up with a control and monitor. And that's essentially the flow of the A3. I like to use it somewhere between the background and the current conditions. The background is going to help you you're still in that process of scoping things out, storming and norming what this process actually is, what this project is about. And then the current conditions, to me, is really about figuring out, with process thinking, what are we actually talking about? What is actually going on? And the way I like to use the SIPOC is I see it as kind of a 30,000 foot view of our process. It helps us scope it, as we've talked about.
Right.
I then, I think, as you were saying, Catherine, one of the things of how you can go wrong is to treat it as its own thing, as its own appendage. And to
Oh,
me, it is so much more of the initial start of the process mapping activities. So the SIPOC as well, just to kind of throw some variations in there. I also like to get how often this process is happening. I like to get the trigger. How does this process
yes.
start, right? What's initiating this? How do I know that this is the thing I have to do? And what does this trigger next? And how does it trigger that, right? So that kind of rounds out the scoping conversation. I then move it into the high level process map that you typically see with kind of more Six Sigma type stuff and less of the lean. But Shayne, this is kind of what you were talking about. Is let's start with the high level process map, a couple boxes. I
Yeah.
see the high level process map is kind of like the 10,000 foot view, and then you can take that really in depth and do your value stream mapping, right? And then that's going to get you through a good chunk of the current conditions, and so on and so forth. I just to hear myself talk a little bit further, you can take this further and drive it into the analysis phase. You can use the suppliers, inputs, process, outputs, customers as branches of your fishbone diagram and
Mm.
actually criticize things
Oh,
like
yeah.
that, or even use the high level process map steps rather than doing your traditional man machine, mother nature, material, and method.
Okay.
Right.
So
That's
all
that's
kinds of variations. It's like a Reese's peanut butter cup, right? There's no wrong way.
and I love how you said you talked about how to use it, how it's still useful later on, because
Yeah,
we will often use it, not just in the high level of, or I should say, we when I was working for the state, how we used it was it gave us that high level view, and it also gave us the scope, but the customers, those key stakeholders, are we would then take that and create, if needed, create a stakeholder analysis, like trying to understand, hey,
perfect.
how many people does this touch? How many people do we need to either involve? It helps you understand who needs to be, if this is going to be a project, who needs to be part of the project team, who needs to be informed, who has responsibilities that they need to know, that, hey, Michael, we're going to be meddling in your process just a little bit, helping improve it. We just want you to know that. What do you have to say about it? It gives us an opportunity. That's one of the things that we use. It gives us an opportunity to create that stakeholder analysis. So I love how it can be
Yeah,
useful, not just at the beginning, but even throughout it. So when I come up with a communication plan with the team, we will then go back to the SIPOC and say,
yes.
here's your customers. How are you going to communicate with all of these people? Some of them could simply be an email. Some of them should probably be face to face. Some of them, whatever. There's just lots of ways to do it. But yeah,
Yeah, excellent. I that reminds me too is when you do the stakeholder analysis, right? You typically see that, hey, these outputs that this process is producing, people are using them different ways. Typically, right? Is you'll have one process output, maybe it's a report, and a business line leader is going to use that very differently than an analyst or something like that. Even though you're producing the same output, it's going to be used in wildly different ways.
yeah. Yeah. So if you're going to change it, you should probably see how it's being used
Exactly.
before you
Exactly.
change it. Yeah, excellent. So Michael, what are some of the, we've talked about, there's different variations of using it. There's different advantages to using it and using it throughout the project, the improvement project, or just the mentality of improving things. What are some common mistakes that you have seen that people make when creating a SIPOC?
Yeah, I think the first one we've kind of touched on is treating it as its own isolated tool, right? I think that's exactly the wrong way to do it. This isn't just something to add to the project portfolio and give it to someone and say, "Hey, look, I did a SIPOC."
Right.
To me, the purpose of the SIPOC is to gain understanding about what it is you're doing. It's also there to kind of protect the project management side of things. But certainly, I think having an understanding that what we're trying to do is gain more knowledge of the current process. I think that's certainly ways where this can go wrong. I would also say that losing focus of the customer on this is quite possibly one of the ways it also fails. As you've mentioned, you all both use the process first, and I think typically a lot of this process mapping sort of thing is prone to this sort of error, where
Mm.
you get so in the weeds of the process, you get so process minded of what's the cycle time, what's the lead time, who's
Right.
where are the work allocations, all of these sorts of kind of inside baseball stuff. When you're talking about process mapping, it's very important to always draw it back to the customer, always understand how they're defining value. And that's, of course, as I said, why I like to start with the customer first.
Right. Yeah. Catherine, what about from your experience?
Just, I'm wondering if you start with the customer, if is that, I mean, okay, you're saying you're kind of maybe linking it to an A3. So you're linking, you're starting with the customer but in a very specific way, linked to something very specific that you want to change or improve. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's fine. We're not just doing a SIPOC and starting with the customer, because that could go on forever in terms of
That's true.
so this is the tool to be used in a very specific tool to be used at a very on a very specific issue that also is a very clearly defined problem.
Yeah, and it occurs to me as well that um, a lot of the projects I work on, there's not necessarily a process defined in place. We know it's almost like entrepreneurial. I think a lot of businesses are like this. It's like we know that we do this thing,
Right.
and it seems to work for us. People pay us for it. That seems, value added, but they have not really thought through the steps to take there. So if you understand first with, okay, what are you actually providing to the customer? Who is this person that's paying you for this thing? What is this thing that you're producing for them? Okay, now we understand what it is we're focused on. Let's understand what it actually takes to produce. And that's kind of why I start to work
Yeah.
backwards.
I think that really helps to keep what is actually valuable to the customer. So if I'm using my hairdresser example, obviously the customer wants to come out with glowing hair, with feeling great, looking great. But exactly, just like Shane's beard there that he's brushing there. The customer's needs have to be met, but we can't compromise on our own internal ways of doing things to give the customer that. We have to obviously
Right.
do our work in the most efficient and effective way. So I think when you start with the customer, you won't lose any of that, but you'll still then be able to work on the parts we can work on and control that will still add as much value as the customer needs. So yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It does.
And I think as you drill down as well, as you start with the SIPOC and then see that as just the natural starting point of those more detailed process mapping activities, that value eventually fleshes itself out when you get to the value streams or so on and so forth.
So let me ask both of you a question, because the way that I was taught, again, there's different variations of this, and they all work, especially in specific areas. One of the mistakes that we were taught to guard against is having too many people in the room when you do a SIPOC, because then you have all of these different ideas and things are popping up and going all over the place. They could also, without having the right people in the room, you might have some naysayers that take it and try to sink your project in the first place. That was one of the common mistakes that they tried to guard us against. Does that line up with how you guys do a SIPOC? It's not the more people the better when it comes to a SIPOC. When we did a SIPOC, we wanted maybe the sponsor and maybe the process owner, maybe one or two of those, but it was a small group of people doing it. It's not the whole project team. I don't want 9 people in the room trying to do a SIPOC. Does that line up with what you guys have practiced as well?
Yeah, certainly. I think you're right. There's a critical mass where things stop being efficient and stop being helpful. My project teams, or maybe not the project team, but the people who I want in the SIPOC, I want the sponsor in there so they can kind of see what's going on. Then I'm kind of looking for 3 different people. One is the historian. Tell me how we got here. These people are not necessarily the process owners, but they might be like IT. Maybe they're the people who put the workflow in place. Maybe they're like a subject matter expert on, maybe you're working like a ServiceNow workflow or a Salesforce workflow. Get the people in there that know the limitations. They know where the compromises have been in the past, and they can kind of explain how we've gotten here. And then I like to get what you call the extreme user. These are people who are working at a very, very high level, and they're doing it in such a way that they're interfacing with a lot of the constraints of the current system, and they're so active and so engaged that they've probably already identified a number of solutions, or hey, if I could just move this here, we would be more efficient. I like to get them involved because they're going to come up and they're going to own a lot of the improvements later on. And then lastly, I like to get just kind of the average operator, right? So I'm going to go to the extreme operator to get all of my insights and understanding, but I want to design it not for that extreme operator, but I want to design it for Joe Sixpack. It's kind of like Nike, right? Nike's going to go and they're going to sponsor all of these elite runners to learn about the thresholds of different materials and how their shoe is constructed, and then they're going to try to sell it to Shane, who's trying to get ready for his summer body, and so on and so forth. So
thank you.
that's kind of, at least having those 3 or 4 people in the room, I think, is really helpful.
I agree with all of that in terms of who needs to be in the room. Generally, for a SIPOC, I think that is where you would bring in I suppose, the sponsor, or as I mostly work with, just senior leader or manager who's involved, because then they don't have to be involved in all of the workshops or any of the other work that's going on once they're clear on what we're doing. The other thing I do, which works really well, is so I'll do a SIPOC at, let's say, leadership team level, and then I will do the exact same SIPOC of the exact same issue or improvement at frontline level, and then I'll take them and I'll compare the two, and I'll show them the differences. But I'll tell them in advance, this is going to be shared with the next team. And then at the end, I'll show them both. And the realizations that people have when they look at the two, and that, wow, we really don't interact the way we could be interacting here. And maybe there's room for improvement here after all. And that actually really helps.
Interesting.
Mindset wise to get them on the behind the improvements. Yeah. Anyway, that's just a little thing I'll throw in. But Michael, we don't have too long left with you, so I would like, if you could, for us, just give us maybe an example of something that might resonate with a lot of different companies and different industries, an example of how you use a SIPOC, maybe something kind of common that you've mapped out with people before, and just talk us through, like, okay, what were the suppliers, what were the inputs, what was the process in a few steps, what were the outputs, and what was the customer? Just 1 or 2 points on each one, just to leave people feeling really crystal clear on what a good SIPOC might look like.
Sure. So if you're familiar with coffee, I have it every morning, and that's something that is process oriented and lends itself very nicely to the SIPOC. So if you think, let's start with the customer. It's me. What do I want? What do I value in my cup of coffee? Well, I drink it black. So that means my inputs are not going to have milk. It's not going to have sugar. I'm not going to have a stirring step, right? Because how I'm defining value might be different from someone else. But anyway, I'm hoping for a hot cup of coffee in my hands. Okay, so now my output is that hot cup of black coffee. So what are the processes it takes to make that? Well, let's skip over that for a moment and go to the inputs. What am I going to need to create this cup of coffee? Well, I'm going to need a coffee machine. I'm going to need some water. I'm going to need coffee filters. I'm going to need a coffee grinder, perhaps, and of course, the coffee beans.
Coffee beans,
of course, right? And then my suppliers, depending on how snobby I want to get, it could be Folgers, it could be some farm in Brazil that I like to source my beans from. And I'm going to have suppliers associated with each one of those things, where I get my filters from, if I have a Mr. Coffee machine, and so on and so forth. All of the inputs will have their own suppliers. And then, of course, the process is just how you actually transform these inputs into this output. So I'm going to grind my beans. I'm going to put the filter in the coffee machine. I'm going to put the ground beans into the coffee machine, fill it with water, and hit the button and let it drip through. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what the SIPOC is. again, I think you can kind of see in this example why I like to start with the customer, right? Is if you like drinking coffee with milk or with a little bit of sugar, your process is going to look a little bit different. Your inputs are going to look a little bit different too, but it's all because of how the customer is defining value.
Right, right. So in that example, what I thought about in your case, and in those that like black coffee, then so the input is actually more important. It may be more important for you than a customer that just, doesn't matter. I just, I want to put a little milk in there, a little bit of sugar. So it's critically important to have good quality source beans is the input, much more than it would be, if I'm going to put cream and sugar in it, then it may not matter to me. I mean, Folgers might just be fine, or I don't want to bag on Folgers, but just a supermarket brand, whatever.
Yep.
So that's interesting.
100%.
I can see how that understanding of what the customer wants, what the customer values will greatly should impact the process and the inputs and some of that. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Michael. If people want to get a hold of you, I'm assuming in this day and age, they can find you on LinkedIn.
Yes, of course. You can find me on LinkedIn. I also have a Substack where I write about kind of these sorts of topics and systems thinking, systems design. So go find me on LinkedIn and then follow a link to get to my Substack.
Okay. And for those of you that aren't in the video, Michael Parent is just like it sounds, is how you're going to find him in LinkedIn.
Like mom and dad.
Just like mom and dad. All right. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for giving us some of your time for listening. We hope that you were able to glean something from this, that it was actually of value and helpful to you. If you have any questions, we would always love any kind of comments to this in whatever platform you're watching or listening to this in. Throw us some comments, throw us some questions. If you want more follow-up, we need to hear that. So thank you for your time. Again, have yourself a great day. Catherine, thank you. Michael, thank you so much for everyone for being here. We will see you next time.